Hey, what's going on, guys? So today we're talking about something a little bit unique, fun, and exciting, at least for me. And that's what would happen if 90 people, well, 87 people from the UFC played Squid Game.
Aaron Rodgers, Conor McGregor versus Tony Ferguson.
So, the obvious spoilers for Squid Game, if you haven't seen Squid Game, I recommend it. If you haven't seen Squid Game, it's probably because you don't have Netflix, though. So, I don't recommend, like, buying Netflix just for it. But if you've already seen Squid Game and you like the UFC, let's jump into it. And for those who have, like, a, kind of like a weaker stomach when it comes to these sort of things, there's going to be, I want you to picture like a PG version and then a regular Squid Game version of this game, right? So if you're cool with the regular Squid Game version of this, that's fine. But if it makes you feel better, if they lose, instead of getting shot in the forehead until they die, they're just politely escorted off of the compound, right? If that makes you feel better. But obviously, we can go from there, right? So I just wanted you to know that this Squid Game can be PG up here, you know what I mean? It's all up there. But anyway, let's get right into it. So the way I decided who the contestants were, like I said, 87 people in the UFC, 3 people not, but I think you're going to be okay with the 3 people I chose to not be. The way I first decided it, I actually just went by 6 people in every division. So it was the champion and the top 5 contenders, right? So that was Brandon Moreno, Denson Figueroa, goodness gracious, Askar Askarov, Alexandra Pantoja, Alex Perez, Brandon Royval, that was for the flyweights, obviously. Aljamain Sterling, Peter Yan, TJ Dillashaw, Corey Sandhagen, Rob Font, and Jose Aldo. And then, after I had about 66 of those people, I started adding people from the UFC that I'd like to see in here, right? Guys like Frankie Edgar, Dominic Cruz, Sean O'Malley, naturally, Cody Garbrandt, Ricky Turcos, the winner of the Ultimate Fighter, right? But then that was it for the bantamweights. For the featherweights, obviously, Alexander the Great, Volkanovski, Max Holloway, Brian Ortega, Yair Rodriguez, Chang Sung-Yoon, the Korean Zombie, Calvin Kattar, and Giga Chikadze, right? So that was for the featherweights. For the lightweights, there was actually a decent amount of lightweights, as you can see. Charles Oliveira, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, Beneil Dariush, Michael Chandler, Islam Makhachev, obviously. But then, obviously, of course, Tony Ferguson, Conor McGregor, Khabib. Khabib was one of the non-UFC fighters that I decided to throw in here for fun. Dan Hooker, Paddy Pimblett. That was it for the lightweights. For the middleweights, this is where it gets, or welterweights, excuse me. It's where it gets a little spicy because we have Kamaru Usman, Kobe Covington, Gilbert Burns, Leon Edwards, Vicente Luque, Stephen Thompson, Belal Muhammad, and Jake Paul. That's right, I put the Paul brothers in here. Those are the other 2 random people I decided. I mean, they're fighters. They're strong. They're athletic, right? It's not a fighting competition. You know what I mean? There's other things involved with Squid Game, and if they get the luck of the draw, they could end up in a Squid Game with someone completely undersized compared to them, and because they're bigger dudes, right? Israel Adesanya, that was it though for the welterweights. For the middleweights, Israel Adesanya, Robert Whittaker, Paulo Costa, Jared Cannonier, Derek Brunson, Marvin Vettori, Kevin Holland, Sean Strickland, Brian Battle, the other winner of the Ultimate Fighter this year, Darren Till, and Logan Paul. I didn't know what class to put the Paul brothers in, so I just threw them where I thought it made sense. For the light heavyweights, we had Jan Blachowicz, Glover Teixeira, Jiri Prochazka, Alexander Rakic, Anthony Smith, and Thiago Santos. Then for the heavies, we had Francis Ngannou, Cyril Gane, Stipe Miocic, Derek Lewis, Curtis Blades, Alexander Volkanovski. And then, of course, Jazina Rosenstruck, John Jones, Tom Aspinall. And that was it for the dudes. That was it for the guys, right? And then for the girls, Rose Namajunas, Zhang Wei Li, Joanna, not saying her last name, Esparza, Marina Rodriguez, Zinora, I don't know how to say their name. And then Valentina Shevchenko, Jessica Andrade, Caitlin Chukenhagen, Lauren Murphy, Jennifer Maya, Cynthia Calvillo, Andrea Lee, then Amanda Nunes, Jermaine de Randami, Holly Holm, Aspen Ladd, Irene Aldana, Juliana Pena, and Misha Tate was the final person, the 90th person in the Squid Game UFC edition. So if you guys do enjoy this content, let me know by clicking that like button and subscribe button. And right now, if you're following along at home, type in the comments, who do you think would win? Who do you think would win with these people in a Squid Game. Remember, it's not just all physical activities. It's essentially children's games, right? And if we are going to go ahead and play the Squid Game version, who do you think would crack under pressure? You know what I mean? Like, I felt like Valentina Shevchenko, and where is he at? Way up here, right? Alexander Volkanovski. Those were the people I was leaning towards. I'd be curious to see guys like Conor McGregor, Khabib cohabitating in the same area. Jake Paul, the Paul brothers. How do people feel about that? It's interesting. It's an interesting one to think about. But without further ado, we jumped right into red light, green light. And the way I decided red light, green light, first thing I did was I went to random number generator on Google, and I just started generating different numbers to get off. Because, okay, if you watch Squid Game, even though it's not random, we know like the main characters that we're watching and seeing are going to survive. It is essentially random how it's going to work out. So in Squid Game UFC edition, we would lose some people based off of just pure randomness. So 25 times I clicked this random number generator, right? And I started getting rid of those people. And then on top of that, I thought to myself, of the remaining people, who would probably struggle with red light, green light, right? So Derek Lewis, first one that came to mind. I don't really see him stopping on a dime anytime soon. Another person, let me think. Let me see. I got it right down here. Another person, Jan Blachowicz, I just felt like he's a little too big, too bulky. You know what I mean? And then the final person was Marvin Vettori. Because most people in the UFC are rather athletic, obviously. That's why they're in the UFC. So I feel like they'd be pretty good at red light, green light, right? But the people that ended up getting eliminated in the first round, like I already mentioned, Marvin Vettori, Jan Blachowicz, Derek Lewis, I thought they just couldn't stop very fast, right? And then the people who would lose randomly, the 25 people who ended up losing randomly, first one, as you see, is Paddy Pimblett. Next one was Carlos Esparza, then Brian Ortega. Khabib Nurmagomedov randomly lost. He's getting a little bit. I mean, he might actually also be in this category at this point now. I did want to say this too. I know some of these people are injured right now, but we just disregarded all injuries, right? Obviously, Khabib, we can't disregard Khabib's, getting fatter, right? But we did disregard all injuries on top of that. But Stephen Thompson, that was a tough one to see him randomly go. But Robert Whittaker, Jared Cannonier, Leon Edwards, Lauren Murphy, Benil Dariush, Thiago Santos, Alexander Pantoja, Jose Aldo, Alexander Volkanovski was pretty insane. I felt like he'd be pretty good at all of them. But Yair Rodriguez, Juliana Pena, Dustin Poirier was another crazy one to lose this early. But Irene Adana, Andrea Lee, Dan Hooker, the Korean Zombie, Jake Paul, Marina Rodriguez, Anthony Smith, and Alexander Rakic. Right, one of the Paul brothers have already gone down, and it's the younger one. And I feel like the younger one's a little bit more wild. He's a little bit more crazy. So I'm not saying anything. I don't want to imply anything by saying this, but I do feel like someone might do that on purpose. Someone might, just give him a little nudge just to see. I'm not saying anybody would. I'm not going to name any names. I just think that he's talked a lot of trash about a lot of UFC fighters, something that his brother has not done. So it'd be interesting to see if, he was in a locked room with, 80 to 86 different UFC fighters, how they would handle that, right? Maybe they'd all be super nice to him and buy him lollipops. I don't know. But that was it for red light, green light. We lost 28 people in red light, green light. And so we moved on to the next game. So the next game was a little bit different, obviously. It was the honeycomb game, right? So the first thing I had to think of was who would be smart enough to figure it out amongst the remaining people, right? So the people who would be smart enough, obviously I had to regroup all of the remaining people. Brandon Moreno, I'm not going to go through all of them, but Brandon Moreno, Aljamain Sterling, Peter Yan, this crew here from the bantamweights all made it, right? Charles Oliveira, Conor McGregor, Tony Ferguson both made it. Kamaru Usman, Colby Covington made it. Israel Adesanya made it. Logan Paul made it. Francis Ngannou made it. Francis was interesting. I feel like Francis might be able to stop on a dime. Don't quote me on that. John Jones made it. Rose Namajunas, Joanna made it. Valentina Shevchenko made it. I feel like she's behind all of it. You know how like the old guy was playing but low-key behind all of it? I feel like she's behind all of it. And then Amanda Nunes and Misha Tate, as well as Holly Holm, all survived, right? So who's smart enough to figure it out? So the first person that came to mind was Dominic Cruz. Dominic Cruz is a smart guy. I feel like he'd be like, his shapes could be the Sugar. And then Sean O'Malley. His name's literally Sugar. So Sean knows everything about Sugar. Michael Chandler's a very intuitive guy. I feel like he'd be like, he would sense it. You know what I mean? With that law of attraction talks about. Tony Ferguson was actually a bit of a wild one. I'm not sure if Tony Ferguson would be smart enough to figure out the game Honeycomb. However, I will say this. I think he would know they're about to play Honeycomb because he's played Honeycomb that much. Of all the people in the UFC, I think Tony Ferguson's the most likely to have played Honeycomb before. Israel Adesanya would have figured it out. Logan Paul would have figured it out. Tom Aspinall would have figured it out. Like I said, Valentina Shevchenko's behind the whole thing. She would have figured it out. Caitlin Chugenhagen would have figured it out. Rose Namajunas would have figured it out. Holly Holm and Miesha Tate would have figured it out. And there's more, as far as like ratios are concerned, there's like 3 girls divisions, but then there's like the same amount of girls as there are guys. Girls are just kind of usually smarter than guys, right? So then I decided who would go where. And the way I did this was from A through L here. I just did 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And I numbered them off. Like some would pick circle. That's what A was. And some would pick triangle. That's what B was, or 2, whichever works for you. Because those are the easiest ones, right? So Dominic Cruz, he's like, I'm gonna do the little circle thing. Sean O'Malley's like, I'm gonna do a triangle, right? So that's how I grouped them off. And then from there, I just did 1 through 4, obviously, right? So I went back up here and I started counting them off. I was like, 1, 2, 3, 4. So Brandon Moreno went to the circle. Davidson Figueroa went to the triangle. Askar Askarova went to the star. Alex Perez went to the umbrella. And I just did that all the way from the remaining people. Obviously, I didn't pick from people who already figured it out, right? Because if you remember in Squid Game, they just randomly picked. After that, I was like, I like umbrellas. So that's why they would go where they went. And then from there, I decided, even though circles have an advantage towards umbrellas, I still don't want it to be just like circles get it, umbrellas don't. So I decided to go here. I rolled a 6-sided die to determine who would go on. So for circles, they had 4 different ways that they could win. So it was 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those were a pass. For the triangles, and I hope all this is making sense to you. It's like random plus kid game. You know what I mean? Who would be good at the kid game plus random number generator, right? So for the triangles, it would be 3 times, like 1, 2, and 3 would be the winners, right? For the star, it would actually be 2 times, right? So just 1 and 2, and then there would only be one way to win, and that's if you rolled a number 1, right? So we actually lost a pretty hefty amount of people during Honeycomb, and so for the people who got the circle, amongst the people who randomly chose the circle and the people who figured it out. The winners were Dominic Cruz, Michael Chandler, Israel Adesanya, Caitlin Chugenhagen, Holly Holm, Brandon Moreno, Brandon Royval, Cody Garbrandt, Giga Kakadze, Vicente Luque, Jiri Prochazka, and Curtis Blades. Those are the only people. So this was the group, which is wild because Conor McGregor randomly got in the circle group and he couldn't make it out. He maybe like someone was talking shit. I don't know. Conor just didn't make it. That was pretty good. Kevin Holland, another trash talker, didn't make it. I feel like Kevin Holland would be pretty good at it, but I think you might get distracted. A lot of things going on. So those are the people who made it out of that group. And then the triangles. Let me see if we can scoot this down just a little bit here. Yeah, we'll just have to do that. Perfect. So Sean O'Malley, Tony Ferguson, like I said, he's played the game before. Logan Paul, obviously, Miesha Tate, Aljamain Sterling, Corey Sandhagen, Ricky Turcos, Charles Oliveira, Kamaru Usman, Bella Muhammad, Sean Strickland, Brian Battle, and Cynthia Calvillo. They all survived while doing the triangle. And then it got a little bit dicey as we only had 4 people survive with the star. That was Peter Yan, Rob Font, Max Holloway, and Amanda Nunes. And then there was one person who got the umbrella and survived, right? Just like the show. And it was Glover Teixeira. Glover Teixeira was the guy. He was doing the little. Glover Teixeira probably did start licking it. Glover Teixeira figured out the licking it thing, right? So that was it. So these were your remaining contestants through 2 rounds of play, right? And then, if you remember correctly, the show fed them an egg and water, and that would work a lot better with UFC fighters who really pay a lot of attention to how they eat, right? So we got to the brawl next, but before we got to the brawl, I figured they'd start developing cliques. They've been in the games for a few days now. They're gonna start develop some cliques, and I divided it into 3 groups. So the cool kids, the brutes, and the rejects, right? So the cool kids are the coolest people still left. The brutes are the people who just want to fight and see who they can fight. And the rejects are whoever's remaining, right? So the cool kids, people like Israel Adesanya, Michael Chandler, Dominic Cruz, Cody Garbrandt, Sean O'Malley, Tony Ferguson, Logan Paul, Miesha Tate, Aljamain Sterling, Kamaru Usman, and Max Holloway. I feel like these were the coolest people that were still left. You know what I mean? And then the brutes, the guys who are like, I just want to fight. Giga Chikadze, Vicente Luque, Jiri Prochazka, Curtis Blaze, Sean Strickland, Peter Yan, Amanda Nunes, and Glover Teixeira. These are people that just want to fight. They don't care who, what, when, where, or why, right? And then the remaining people who would just form an alliance because they don't have any friends. Caitlin Schugenhagen, Holly Holm, Brandon Moreno, Corey Sandhagen, Ricky Turcos, Charles Oliveira, Bella Muhammad, Brian Battle, Brandon Royval, and Cynthia Calvillo. So the way I decided the brawl would go is I figured who would end up fighting and who would not, because there would be these are smart people, kind of, and so they're relatively smart, and so they'd be like, maybe we shouldn't fight, or we should try to avoid it, kind of like how the old man survived, right? I feel like the rejects are definitely not going to fight, right? The brutes, on the other hand, they're going to go after the cool kids, all right? But there's obviously more cool kids than brutes. First, we had to decide who would take whose food, right? Because you gotta figure out, like, who would be so hungry they would just take someone's food. So I decided Kamaru Usman would take Bella Muhammad's food, right? And this was Kamaru Usman made sense. Bella Muhammad, I did a random number generator on the rejects, and I did 10 for the random number generator, and it landed on Bella Muhammad, right? So that's how Bella Muhammad ended up there. And in a fight, I feel like even though we might see Bella Muhammad versus Kamaru Usman in a fight already, I feel like, especially, food deprived, I think Kamaru Usman easily beats Bella Muhammad, like slams him on the ground, right, and eliminates him however you want people to be eliminated, however you're picturing them getting eliminated in your head. That's the cool thing. If you're following along at home, they can be eliminated however you want to. Maybe they're given $50 and they're sent on their way, or maybe they're shot in the face. That's up to you, right? So now we're at the brawl. The first fight we had was Vicente Luque, Giga Chikadze, versus Logan Paul, Michael Chandler, and Tony Ferguson, right? So Logan Paul and Michael Chandler probably be hanging out talking about law of attraction. Tony Ferguson would just be chilling there with his shades on because they let him bring his shades in. And Vicente Luque, Giga Chikadze try to fight him. Listen, Logan Paul's a big dude, right? If there was someone that if you had to pick between 2 Paul brothers, who would you want to not survive? It would probably be like Jake Paul, right? Or Logan Paul, because he's the bigger one. He's a little bit smarter. He's a little bit better spoken. So that's why he's part of the cool kids. So they ended up easily beating Giga Chikadze. Because remember, Michael Chandler's big for his size. Logan Paul's big for his size, and so is Tony Ferguson. Even though Vicente Luque is the biggest, 3v... Actually, I think Logan Paul's the biggest. But 3v1, I think that, Logan Paul maybe lands a clean shot on Giga, gets knocked out by Vicente Luque, but he's okay. Michael Chandler tackles him and chokes him out. And Tony Ferguson finishes Giga Chikadze. And the cool kids win with no people getting eliminated, right? And so you guys can let me know, who do you think would win in a fight between Vicente Luque and Giga Chikadze? Obviously not to the death, but maybe, to the death if that's your fancy. Versus Logan Paul, Michael Chandler, and Tony Ferguson. I thought the cool kids would win because their strength and size and numbers. But these are 2 very solid fighters. These are very crafty fighters, right? And nobody gave Giga a chance against Edson Barbosa, so he likes being the underdog. The next group would actually be Jiri, Curtis Blades, Glover Teixeira, Cody Garbrandt, Sean O'Malley, Dominic Cruz, and Kamaru Usman. So versus, so the cool kids, Cody Garbrandt, Sean O'Malley, Dominic Cruz, Kamaru Usman, versus Curtis Blades, Glover Teixeira, and Jiri. So this one would be interesting, right? Because it's like Kamaru Usman defending the 3 little guys, right? So I think how this would go, first off, I think Kamaru Usman, just because he's Kamaru Usman, would take one of these guys out, right? Because keep in mind, Cody Garbrandt, Sean O'Malley have surprisingly good power, right? And Dominic Cruz, even though they're very undersized compared to Jiri and Curtis and Glover Teixeira, and Dominic Cruz is smart, right? And I don't think that it would be like crazy, like we saw in the Squid Game, if we just turned all the lights off and just had an all-out brawl with UFC fighters. Like if you remember, like Chael Sonnen versus Vanderlei Silva in The Ultimate Fighter, like they both like squared up. Like they didn't like actually just start brawling and going crazy. Like they actually like squared up and fought each other, right? So it would be. I think that Dominic Cruz's fight IQ would help, right? So I think one of these, I think the Brutes would easily win, though. I will say that, but I think one of the Brutes would go down because these are 3 really smart fighters, and Cody Garbrandt's got a lot of random power, right? And Kamaru Usman's Kamaru Usman. I rolled it a random 3-sided die, and it landed just like there. It landed on Curtis Blades, right? And now I think what would end up happening, stay with me on this. Cody and Sean fight Jerry. Dom and Kamara fight Curtis and Glover Teixeira. Cody and Sean almost beat Jerry, so Glover Teixeira goes to help after Kamara beats Curtis. But Glover Teixeira defeats, eliminates, I should say, Dominic Cruz. So then we have Kamaru Usman versus Jerry, Cody, and Sean. Jerry takes out Cody, almost gets dropped by Sean, but then Glover saves him. Kamara saves Sean, but then Jerry eliminates Sean. And then it's Jerry and Glover versus Kamaru Usman. And Kamaru Usman's like, listen, we ain't got to do this. I can be a brute just like you guys. You want to keep me? Look how strong I am. Kamaru Usman, you know what I mean? And they save him, right? So I think what would end up happening in this fight, at least in this situation, is the Brutes would win with Jerry and Glover Teixeira being the winners, but Kamaru Usman would do a deal with the devil and join the Brutes. The final fight would be Sean Strickland and Peter Yan versus Israel Adesanya, Max Holloway, and Aljamain Sterling, because if given the opportunity, Peter Yan is hunting Aljamain Sterling, who's probably talking with Israel Adesanya and Max Holloway how to win a fight that you clearly lost. And so Peter Yan just jumps Aljamain Sterling. That's how the brawl probably would start. Is Peter Yan jumps Aljamain Sterling. Israel goes to defend him. Sean's like, this is my chance at Israel. And so Sean distracts Israel well enough to where he has to fight Sean Strickland. And Max trying to help Aljamain Sterling, who's just getting the snot absolutely crap out of him by Peter Yan. And what ends up happening is Peter Yan defeats Aljamain Sterling, but Max Holloway avenges him, and then Israel comes to help after he defeats Sean Strickland. And we actually might get to see Sean Strickland versus Israel Adesanya in probably like a year or so, right? If all the cards fall the right way, right? And so obviously there's 2 people who aren't fighting who are part of the Cool Kids and Brutes. And I think for a while they wouldn't fight, but then it would be like a rite of passage type situation where Amanda Nunes would have to fight Miesha Tate. And we all saw how that went the first time. Another fight we might see, so that's exciting. But I think we'd still see Amanda Nunes come out on top. Miesha Tate get eliminated, right? So what that would leave for the Cool Kids is Israel Adesanya, Michael Chandler, Tony Ferguson, Logan Paul, and Max Holloway, right? So the Cool Kids would be all right. They'd have 5 people, right? But then they all, not only because they lost some people during the brawl, but then Kamaru Usman also switched sides, right? He was a Cool Kid. Now he's a Brute with Jerry Prochaska, Glover Teixeira, and Amanda Nunes. I flipped his R and his O. That's okay. And then the rejects would do the best, as they didn't even fight. So Caitlin Chugenhagen, Holly Holm, Brandon Moreno, Corey Sandhagen, Ricky Turcos, Charles Oliveira, Brian Battle, Brandon Royval, and Cynthia Calvillo. They would all move on. They would all not be eliminated. And so this is how I've decided to do it. So just like we saw on the show, where some of the rejects were like, we got to get dudes, we got to get guys. So Charles Oliveira, Corey Sandhagen, Brian Battle, they campaign with Kamaru Usman and Jerry Prochaska to see if they can join a team. Kamaru Usman's like, yeah, you guys seem cool, strong, and solid, and Jerry's like, yeah, I like strong guys, right? And so they end up facing Holly Holm, Brandon Moreno, Brandon Royval, Cynthia Calvillo, and Caitlin Chugenhagen, because, these are the 5 people that no one would want on a team, so they ended up on a team together. And then we see Ricky Turcos, Israel Adesanya, Tony Ferguson, and Amanda Nunes. Ricky Turcos is actually pretty cool. So that's where the Cool Kids are like, hey, Ricky, come here, right? Because they would see that Michael Chandler, Logan Paul, and Max Holloway betrayed them, and they decided to go with Glover Teixeira, right? For the 1 versus 2 matchup, since it was so lopsided, I rolled an 8-sided die 5 times. I rolled an 8-sided die 5 times. And if it landed on one time, which it did here, but it did not here, then they would win. So that meant that Charles Oliveira, Corey Sandhagen, Brian Bell, Kamaru Usman, Jerry. It would be just like kind of the show. Like these are like probably the 5 of the strongest guys still here versus probably 5 of the weakest people still here. For Ricky Turcos, Israel Adesanya, Tony Ferguson, Amanda Nunes versus Michael Chandler, Logan Paul, Max Holloway, and Glover Teixeira. I decided to roll 2 20-sided dies one time. Whoever had the higher number ended up winning. And just like there, Michael Chandler, Logan Paul, Max Holloway, Glover Teixeira defeats Ricky Turcos, Israel Adesanya, Tony Ferguson, Amanda Nunes. This is kind of like we like the mentality of fighting group, and this is like the we're strong but cool group, and Glover Teixeira, right? So that's who ends up winning. That's who ends up moving on. So it's actually an odd number, right? But if you remember, it was an odd number in the show, right, for the next event, which was marbles, right? The remaining 9 people would be Charles Oliveira, Corey Sandhagen, Brian Battle, Jiri Prochazka, I fixed his name, Michael Chandler, Kamaru Usman, Logan Paul, Max Holloway, Glover Teixeira, right? And so let me know, how do you think they would go off with each other, right? Because the way I decided, this is how I figured it out. All right, because like I said, just like the show, they wouldn't realize that they're going to be facing each other. They'd be partnering up. Charles Oliveira and Glover Teixeira would join forces because, well, they are Brazilian, right? And then Brian Battle and Kamaru Usman, because Brian Battle will be like, bro, you're Kamaru Usman. Like, Brian Battle's smooth, right? He'd be able to smooth talk Kamaru Usman. They're about the same size. They're actually, Brian Battle's one weight class above Kamaru Usman. So he'd be like, hey, we're both pretty strong, smart dudes. Can we work together? So they would. Nobody would pick Logan Paul. Nobody would pick Logan Paul. And Logan Paul, hey, come on, guys, I can do it. And everybody's just like looking at him, right? This is what you get for making a joke out of the fighting game, right? And they think they got him, right? And they don't realize is what they don't realize. Jiri Prochazka versus Michael Chandler. That would be another thing that would happen. And then we have Max Holloway versus Corey Sandhagen. They kind of know each other, but not really. Because they're like, you know, smaller guys, I guess. One's a featherweight and one is a bantamweight. So that means that they must know each other, but not really. And so then I decided for marbles to first give the edge to who I think would outsmart who. No offense to Brian Battle, who seems like he's a smart cookie. Kamaru Usman's on another level. Like, we see the way Kamaru Usman talks, the way he fights. I think Kamaru Usman easily outsmarts Brian Battle and beats him. Kind of maybe the way that the accountant did, or whatever that guy did, the super rich guy that went to the super nice college. I forget his name or his number, right? That's how Kamaru Usman gets Brian Battle. It's like one of those big scenes like with Ali. Goodness gracious, episode 6 I'm getting episode 6 flashbacks right now. And then Michael Chandler versus Jiri. Like I said, Jiri, another not so smart character versus Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler would probably law of attraction Jiri into just handing him all of his marbles. And then Charles Oliveira and Glover Teixeira, Corey Sandhagen, and Max Holloway. I just rolled, same thing I did here. I just rolled a D20, just like the two girls. Man, flashbacks again. And whoever ended up on top there would end up on top. For that, Glover Teixeira and Corey Sandhagen won. So that meant for the final round, Glover Teixeira, Kamaru Usman, Logan Paul, Michael Chandler, and Corey Sandhagen made it, the final 5. Right, so the glass was similar to just flipping a coin. Right? But how would the order be decided? So the order I decided would be Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler would be the first person to pick, and he would want to go first, because that's how Michael Chandler always has been and always will be. Right? He's just like, I'm going first. Justin Gage is going to take the first step back, even if he's a great counter striker and he'll knock me out. That's how I fight. Right? And then I decided Logan Paul would be the next confident person who would want to pick one in the middle. Kamaru Usman would pick one right in between them. And then Corey Sandhagen's like, I'm fine with going right behind Logan Paul. And then Glover Teixeira would go after. For this, it's all about vibes, right? None of these guys are glass experts like we saw on the show. So they just had to get the right vibe. So I gave Michael Chandler one freebie. I said Michael Chandler, because of law of attraction, would get one freebie. And then for the remaining ones, I flipped a coin. Heads, they moved on. Tails, they fell through the wrong thing of glass, right? So I don't know how this happened, right? And obviously, if the person in front of them got heads, then they would get heads, just like the show. They know, right? They know. If you know, you know, right? I don't know how this happened, but when I did this, and it was last night at like 2 o'clock in the morning when I was doing this, but Michael Chandler got heads every single time. So they all just moved on. Most boring Squid Game ever, right? They all just, they're like, what is he doing? How does he know? The glass exploded. Remember, it took one of them out. It's such a horrible way to lose number 67. Who would be the person of these 5 who would be least likely to take a shard of glass to the stomach or the chest or the face, right? Obviously, the non-fighter of the group, Logan Paul. Logan Paul's got clearly, if you've seen any of these guys' fights, the lowest sense of pain tolerance out of all of them. So Logan Paul is the cat. He goes to the dinner. He's eating it. They wake up the next morning. Logan Paul doesn't wake up. Like, what happened to Logan Paul? And they're like, oh my gosh, he's got glass in his stomach. Goodness gracious, this is a long video. But that's okay. So, because we're at the finale, Squid Game. The way I decided who fought who in Squid Game, completely random. Random number generator for the final 4. And I said, that person's facing that person. I'm sure the way they would do it if there was 4 people left is they'd have 1v1 and then another 1v1 and then the winners take each other and the losers get eliminated, right? So the way I did that, once we figured out the grouping, they just win. And unfortunately for Corey Sandhagen, his first round matchup was Kamaru Usman. Should be pretty obvious. Kamaru Usman wins that fight. And then Glover Teixeira versus Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler can't really out-wrestle Glover Teixeira. Glover Teixeira is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artist. Glover Teixeira also has crazy knockout power, and Michael Chandler's kind of got a weaker chin. Glover Teixeira also has about, like, 40 pounds on Michael Chandler. Even though Michael Chandler's strong, I think that would be a good fight. I think Glover Teixeira versus Michael Chandler actually would be a good fight. Even if it was, like, them at their weight. If they met at a weight class, I think Michael Chandler gets the edge, actually. But if it was just, like, free weight, and you just be, like, 190 versus 150, because it's Squid Game, and that's what you can do, I think then Glover Teixeira would win, right? But I think it would be close. It'd be a lot closer. I think Corey Sandhagen just gets like thrown out of the Squid Game, right? I think he just gets picked up and thrown out. I don't think that's even close. No offense to Corey Sandhagen, but it's Kamaru Usman, right? So Kamaru Usman's feeling fresh. He's feeling light against Glover Teixeira, who is just in a war. Because Michael Chandler's not just going to give up. We saw what happened when Charles Oliveira got Michael Chandler's back, and he like picked him up and threw him back down, right? We saw what happened when Michael Chandler's got some power too. So Glover Teixeira's got a puffed up eye. He's got a bruised lip. You know, he's got bruised ribs. He's limping everywhere. And he's facing a fresh Kamaru Usman. So a fresh Kamaru Usman versus Glover Teixeira. And Kamaru Usman's a smart fighter. Don't forget, like, he's not just the best pound for pound fighter in the UFC for a reason. Like, the last person you would want to see make it all the way here to the Squid Game is the best pound for pound fighter in the world, Kamaru Usman. So in a fight with Kamaru Usman versus Glover Teixeira to decide the winner of the Squid Game, I had Kamaru Usman winning that out, which meant the winner of the Squid Games was Kamaru Usman, right? So let's go all the way back to see Kamaru Usman's journey. And let me know if Kamaru Usman was your guy that you thought would win this. Like I said, click that like button and the subscribe button if you guys like this kind of content here. Let me know if I'm just actually insane for doing this type of thing in those comments down below as well. But Kamaru Usman made it because he's the champion of the welterweight division. That's how he qualified for the Squid Games. He probably would have qualified even if he wasn't in the top. He's a cool dude, right? He's just a pretty eccentric guy, right? And then in red light, green light, he managed, we thought he was probably pretty agile enough to not just be able to stop on a dime, and he didn't randomly lose, right? We lost a lot of people when they randomly lost, right? And then for Honeycomb, even though, and he might actually be smart enough to figure this out on his own. I think he was one of the people I was like, maybe he should be in there, but not, maybe not. But I guess, you know, the universe decides what the universe decides, and he got triangle anyway, because he's a smart cookie. No pun intended, and he ended up moving on because he got the triangle out, right? Then we ended up having the brawl, and during the brawl, because he's such a strong, buff dude, he switched sides. He's a double agent. He double-crossed his cool kids group, and he joined the Brutes after realizing that the cool kids, most of the cool kids are small dudes like Cody Garbrandt, Sean O'Malley, and Glover Teixeira. He's like, please don't just beat me up because I hung out with the 3 small dudes, right? So Kamaru Usman switched sides, ended up with the Brutes. He ended up on probably the best set of 5 people you could pick in one of the easiest tug of wars we'd ever see against Holly Holm, Brandon Moreno, Brandon Royval, Cynthia Calvillo, and Caitlin Chugenhagen. He moved on in marbles to fight Brian Battle because Brian Battle just, he admires Kamaru Usman's grit. And unfortunately, Brian Battle, similar to what we saw happen to Ali in this show, flashbacks, Kamaru Usman outsmarted Brian Battle. And then he moved on to the Glass. Now, the Glass, he got really fortunate because he went behind Michael Chandler, who law of attractioned his way to victory. And unfortunately, Logan Paul didn't make it through there because the Glass exploded. But everybody else was like, hey, that's, I take shots like that every day. He fought Corey Sandhagen in the first round of the Squid Game and easily defeated him, to where he fought the winner of Glover Teixeira versus Michael Chandler, where he defeated Glover Teixeira and was the Squid Game winner 2021. So let me know what you guys think. Do you think that in an overall Squid Game, Kamaru Usman would be victorious, just like we saw in the simulation? Let me know in those comments down below. I spent a lot of time, effort, and energy on this, so if you guys do like this, make sure you just let me know by clicking that like button and that subscribe button. But most importantly of all, as always, have a good day.